Welcome everyone to this episode of Freedom Hub's Working Group. I am your host, Jeff Cantor, along with Charles Frohman. We are sponsored by the Marketplace for Health, Wealth, and Freedom, and we'll take a detour over there. And just remember, we are the disruptors intersection. That's key to what we're trying to accomplish here, is make a few things change and bring the right people together to make it so. Now, we also have a separate show, so we're encouraging you to subscribe to these. This is the same idea, free market, but dealing with medical side of the world, another big problem area. But these are some great archival links to go back to see the past events. And as I said, we are on the Marketplace for Health, Wealth, and Freedom. These are both two domain names that go to the same place. Before I get too far down the road, because I'm going to shift over out of there into my brand new, I'm so excited, browser, because finally there's one so I could get rid of Chrome, Internet Explorer, all of them, to get this new completely private thing. And boy, I'll tell you, I've already been enjoying it to the point where, just to show you, I went to the place I do banking, and I don't know if you can see or not, but up in this URL bar here, see what it says there? This site has been blocked from using motion sensors. I didn't even know they were doing that to me. So just so you know, it's brave.com. Check it out. So here we are. This is the website, as I indicated. There's an awful lot here to explore. There's a lot being added for sure in the coming weeks. When you go over to the home page and you hover down here over webinars, takes you to what we're doing today, and then very importantly, continuing the conversation. So let's jump there first, because that's what happens after the webinar takes place. These are some really fantastic topics and some great people that are leading the charge. And this is your chance to get involved with them and get to meet them personally and the like. So we're glad to have you continue the conversation. And then also under the freedom area, there's a lot of people fighting for our freedoms. And so that's really what's off on this page here. We feature all the action items that you really need to actually sadly engage in all of them. And then here, as you can see, an ever-growing list of organizations and some other past videos and things for you to explore. There's a lot. But let's kick into where we are for today. So we come to the webinar tab, and when you do, you get over here. There's a nice little rundown on what we're doing. There's a breakout of the two events, both the 4 o'clock, which is now, and then this evening one. Also a little catch up on who's coming up. And then also the links, and this is the important part of why I'm coming here, is at the bottom. These are the links where all these videos are archived. So on Monday, all the videos from the preceding week will be posted. If we were to click on the Brighteon one as example, here we go. You'll see, and John will be the first one in the list starting on the weekend. We just had one over here that got banned on YouTube, another badge of encouragement we've had. We've got 2 so far. We're trying to get to 3 strikes and we're out. And then on that note, let's shift into where we are for today. So now I'm going to give the pleasure to Charles, introduce our guest here today.
And it is a pleasure, Jeff. Welcome, John. When I saw something online from him about rebirthing worlds based on creativity, I had to reach out to him and see about a presentation, because we've had a number of guests over the years on that topic, and I've been involved professionally in my past with some of these related efforts. And Professor Lobell teaches architecture at the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, and he's been associated with some pretty high-level icons of our culture over the past generation, including the Dalai Lama. And for those of us who really got into mythology and the cult of the hero with Joseph Campbell, John knew him and wrote a book on Joseph Campbell. And interestingly, John has another website where he looks at movies and analyzes the mythology therein. And that reminds me of one of our guests from a year ago, Paul Cantor at UVA, a Shakespeare professor, who's also an Austrian economist, and he writes books on the political lessons of popular culture. And recently we had from Conscious Capitalism, that I helped found with Michael Strong and John Mackey when they called it Flow in the mid-2000s, Alexander McCoben. And guests like that are really useful, I think, for now, because from up top, some of these scary international players are trying to impose a new normal or what's called a great reset. But for years, even before the past year, we've had entrepreneurial visionaries talking about how we can build a better world consciously. And I think that's what Professor Lobell is going to discuss today is using our vision, our creativity to help co-create this world. And so I can't wait to hear what he has to say, Jeff.
Fantastic. All right, I'm going to release the screen there for you. And John, if you'll do the honors.
Thank you. So I'm hung up on something you said. How do you get banned from YouTube?
You have to go online. They have a list of stuff you're not allowed to talk about, and then you just talk about them and you're banned.
Oh, great.
It's real simple. It's real simple. And pretty much just about anything will get you banned anymore these days, it seems. So there you go.
But to be specific, challenging the dominant COVID narrative is pretty much no. Yeah, not allowed to ask questions.
All the videos we got banned were related to that topic. Yes. All right, John, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'm not familiar with this audience, so I'm just going to charge ahead and hopefully generate some interesting questions at the end. And I got interested in creativity, and it occurred to me, I've worked with, studied with some of the most creative figures of the 20th century, and know a lot about creativity. So I wrote a book, Visionary Creativity, How New Worlds Are Born. Let me get this to advance. Oh, let me get my laser pointer. There we go. So a little bit about me. Studied architecture at the University of Pennsylvania with some major figures in architecture. Teach at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York. Have MOOCs on Build Academy. I've been an environmental sculptor, worked for interesting architectural offices. I'm director of research for Timeship, a next generation cryonics facility. Here are some of my websites. I get an idea, I make a website. I have about 100 lectures on YouTube. And I'm going to mention these two books in a context of the culture we're in. So we'll get to that later. So let's start with, you people seem to be pretty good at being contrarian. That's me. Really bugs my wife. But I a little awkwardly stated, but Peter Thiel has this quote, his favorite interview question: what do you believe that almost no one else believes? Now, a couple of things. That's pretty difficult. And then when you come up with it, maybe you're better off keeping your mouth shut because you could get into trouble. So I look at the major thinkers behind my colleagues who are into cultural theory, and I don't follow any of them. Lynn Margulies, instead of Darwin, who totally upsets Darwin's idea of natural selection. I prefer Spengler to Marx, Jung to Freud, Campbell to Jacques Lacan, McLuhan to Deleuze, Steven Pinker to Saussure, Lawrence Cassier and Merleau-Ponty to Foucault, Chogyam Trungpa to Jacques Derrida. So I put together my own foundations, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So these are some of the books. If someone said to me, how would you put together a point of view like your own, John? These would be the books I would recommend. But I don't think anybody should put together that point of view. They should put together their own point of view. So, but just as point of reference. And then in terms of my own psychological character, who I am, the two books most influential on me are André Gide's The Moralist and Chogyam Trumpa's Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. So when you write a book, you can be pretty confident very few people are going to buy it, and even less are going to read it. So I put the whole book on the cover. Visionary Creative Swim. in the culture of their day and manifest in their work the spirit of their age. The things they create in art, design, science, technology, business. And right there, I'm saying something that I regard science, technology, and business as equally valid creative fields as art. Embody that spirit, and at the same time, are a little bit off, not what we had anticipated, and thereby restructure our consciousness and pull us into the future. So I came of age in the 60s and big admirer of Andy Warhol. And this was kind of radical at the time, but then I thought about it. Here's Paul Cezanne, still life. And this is what a grocery store looked like for Paul Cezanne. If you went out to buy groceries, this is what he would see. That's what he painted. When I studied painting at the Art Students League, we did still lifes like this. In the meantime, Andy Warhol was doing this. Well, Andy Warhol said, why should I paint what Cezanne saw? Why don't I paint what I see? And this is a grocery store for Andy Warhol, very different from one in the 1880s for Paul Cezanne in Paris. And we like to use the term when our cable system crashes. Hopefully you have a nearby teenager who can fix it, and they can because they're a digital native. That's their world. Well, Andy Warhol was a popular culture native. So I said, visionary creatives swim in the culture of their day. What's a culture? Culture are symbolic meaning systems. Cultures are the stage on which we live out our lives. Here is Leonardo da Vinci painting study for perspective, and that was the Newtonian space-time of the Renaissance. We're in a very different one. I'll get to that shortly. But I reject books like Guns, Germs, and Steele saying that cultures depend on the material context and instead see them as symbolic. And in understanding creativity, looking at creative people. So if we want to understand creativity, should we look to a psychologist or look to Vincent van Gogh, who says wings, wings to fly above life, wings to fly above the grave and death. That is what we want, and I'm beginning to understand that we can get them. No psychologist can write about creativity and talk about wings, flying, or death. That's why all psychological writing about creativity has no validity. So I prefer poetic metaphor. Some of my favorite figures in poetic metaphor, Oswald Spengler, Kumbswarmi, Joseph Campbell, Friedrich Nietzsche. Spengler says, the means whereby we identify dead forms is mathematical law. The means whereby we understand living forms is metaphor. So I look to Nietzsche, who gives us the parable of the camel, the lion, and the child, and thus spoke Zarathustra. He writes of how the camel, the spirit became a camel, and then the camel a lion, and the lion finally a child. So the camel kneels down wanting to be well loaded. That's us taking on our culture, being educated in our culture and the traditions of our discipline. And I think of a good education as like a framework in which everything you encounter for the rest of your life will grow into that framework. But without such a framework, everything you encounter will only be accumulated haphazardly. And if your education has not given you a framework, which they don't do today, you have to build your own. And of course, the framework should be flexible and be able to adapt. So I look at people I admire like Joseph Campbell, who was studying medieval literature at Columbia in 1927, went to Paris and Munich. In Europe, he discovered Freud and Jung, Picasso and Klee, Joyce and Mann. These were pretty much unknown in this country, and he decided he wanted to incorporate them into his work. And Columbia told him, no, you can't do that. You've got to adhere to the straight and narrow. So the stock market had just crashed. He rented a cabin in Woodstock for 5 years at $50 a year and bought books on credit and read 9 hours a day for 5 years. He took notes in the margins, then he did a 10-page summary of each book, which he then reduced to a 2-page summary. So when he was in his 80s, he could still call on that material because he had fully absorbed it. And then he started working and worked backwards. He was blown away by Spengler, as everybody was, in the 1920s, which led him back to Nietzsche, which led him to Schopenhauer, which led him to Kant, and then Joyce and Jung, which led him to Freud. And we find all that in Hero with a Thousand Faces and The Masks of God. I've yet to meet anyone who's read, other than my mother. It's 4 volumes of 700 pages each. She read the whole thing, each one twice. Took her 2 years to do it. And Campbell says, mythology is the opening through which the inexhaustible energies of the cosmos pour into human cultural manifestation. Again, every word here cannot be used by a psychologist or a sociologist. So talking about mastering your discipline, some mega bestsellers we're probably all familiar with. I kid my students and say, how many have a tiger mother? And of course, the Asians don't dare raise their hands. They all sort of smile and turn away because they do. Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, who says that success comes from chance and hard work, not from internal genius. Erickson, who originated the 10,000 hours thing. And then finally, Angela Duckworth in Grit. But all of these books stop with mastery. They talk about how to, very aggressively master. But that's only halfway through. The camel then becomes a lion who would conquer his freedom and be master in his own desert. The job of the lion is to overthrow all of that. So Woodrow Wilson writes, it's the business, and Wilson was the president, but he was also, before that, president of Princeton University. It is the business of a university to impart the right thought of the world. Well, what about questioning? And if need be, overthrowing the right thought of the world? That's the role of the lion. For the ultimate victory, the lion wants to fight with the great dragon. The dragon is everything you have mastered in the camel stage. On every scale of the dragon is written, thou shalt. And the lion says, no, I will. Isn't it cool that every one of these appears in a drawing by Leonardo da Vinci? So I think of, we could pick any creative people, but Beethoven mastered the Viennese Symphony before he overthrew it to launch Romanticism. Lynn Margulies mastered Darwinian evolution before overthrowing it with symbiogenesis. Thelonious Monk worked with the jazz greats of his day to create bebop before entering his own world. But the lion cannot create the new. He creates the freedom to create the new, but it's the child who creates the new. The child is innocence and forgetting a new beginning, a wheel rolling out of its own center. Now, Nietzsche leaves out one step. So who can tell me who the guy in the upper left is? Anybody? That's Isaac Newton. Here's the one to his right.
Einstein?
Got it. You won't know this one. This is for architects. This is Buckminster Fuller, and then we should all know who this is. J.K. Rowling. So every one of these had the opportunity to be alone for 2 years. You absorb all this material and then just sit and think and be left alone. Newton had to leave London and go to his hometown to escape the plague. Nobody in, you couldn't talk like today. You couldn't meet with anybody. They didn't have Zoom. So he just thought, he came up with the whole thing, laws of motion, gravity, and optics, all by the age of 23 in those 2 years alone. Einstein famously worked in the patent office and refused promotions because he could get his work done in 2 hours in the morning and spend the rest of the day thinking. Buckminster Fuller, very tragically, his daughter died as a child. He did not talk for a year. He just thought, what can one person do to make a better world? And then J.K. Rowling would sit every day in the Elephant Pub alone, working out the Harry Potter stories. So how might we apply this to our emerging 21st century? And I'll be brief so we can have some time, but I'm sort of conflating two different things. One is creativity, and then how do we see our culture? And they do relate, so I'll go through this briefly. But today, I would say the world and we are fractal networks computationally generating themselves and each other from simple rules. That's the stage on which we're living, otherwise known as Indra's net, which I'll get to. So Bell's theorem shows that when two particles become entangled, they can be separated across the universe. They're still the same phenomenon. Space doesn't exist. Lynn Margulies says, life did not take over the globe by combat, natural selection, but by networking. This is how many genes are in our body, in microbes. This is how many of our own. And we're exchanging them all the time. Not too good an idea at the moment, but it's how evolution works. 1953, Watson and Crick figured out the structure of DNA. We have 4 letters, A, T, C, and G. 2 rules, A and T can link, C and G can link, and 20 parts, the amino acids, make all of life. Now, for my students, that suggests something. Get to that in a minute. Stephen Wolfram, I think when I find the code that generates our world, it'll be about 6 lines. That the world is not made up of Newton's differential equations. It's made up of simple rules like software. So we notice that the limbs on a tree, the twig branches, the twigs, the veins in the leaf, all look similar. It's because the tree only has one set of rules that it keeps reusing. Those rules can build the universe. And we're surrounded by networks. What do they mean? What are they doing to us? So this is my first Macintosh. And it was basically a glorified typewriter. I had a modem, but I wasn't much to do with it. I didn't use it very much. Today, yes, this is more powerful, but the point is it's connected to the cloud. What does that mean? What is it doing to us? So here's my book on Louis Kahn, most important American architect after Frank Lloyd Wright. Monticelli Press printed 3,000 copies. They're discrete physical objects. My book on creativity is published by Amazon Kindle Direct, and they didn't print any books. When you order one, they manufacture it right then and send it out that day. But not only that, I'm reading my Kindle copy of my book, and there's stuff highlighted. What the hell's that? It's stuff other people highlighted. What's that doing on my copy? We're all interconnected, whether we like it or not. So what are networks doing to us? We're just beginning to try to figure that out. But when I say all is Indra's net in Hinduism and Buddhism is a giant crystal chandelier. Every crystal is faceted, and every facet of every crystal reflects all the other crystals. I like to tell my students, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, the ones who will be successful in the next generations are the ones who intuitively understand and live in that world. So here's a painting we all know, Surat's Sunday afternoon in the park, and we have these stately classical figures, but we know when we zoom in on them, they're all made up of these dots. Fractal networks computationally generating themselves and each other, which we're exchanging. So in industrial society, I like to get my students nervous. You go to school to get an education, to gain skills, to get a job, to make money, to buy what you need. In our emerging digital genomic society, you skip the whole thing and just 3D print what you need. Everything changes. So these are some of my colleagues working with these ideas of buildings growing themselves. Randolph-Finney does fashion as well as architecture. This is flocking software. Carl Shu gives the students 3 genes, DNA, and the building grows itself. And this is one of my colleagues who has worked out the geometry of the entire universe of form. And these columns are in the New York's Museum of Modern Art. And the information that tells these columns how to bend is not in the machine coming from the outside, but is in the material. So I like to say, if you wanted to make an oak tree, you would not stick a telephone pole in the ground, nail sticks to it, and glue leaves to the sticks. You plant an acorn and let the stupid oak tree make itself. Oak trees aren't very bright, but they can make oak trees. Our cell phones are really smart. That's a $30 million Cray 1 supercomputer. Why can't it make itself? This is Game of Life, a glider gun making gliders. So this arrangement is manufacturing these guys. We should be able to do that. So I challenge my students to understand the culture we live in and live in it. So the visionary creative lives in an emerging world and asks, what am I experiencing? What am I going on? What's going on? While most of us ask, what have I been told I'm experiencing? From that question, what am I actually experiencing, comes the new in art, science, technology, business, indeed, whole new worlds.
Right, that was very good. I appreciate
Great,
that.
thank you.
That was very good. I appreciate that. You know, it's interesting as you're describing those types of individuals from my background, having been a music buff, you were describing Frank Zappa, because he wrote music about what he saw, not like love songs. And also he completely destroyed the whole conventional wisdom. He mastered everything and then destroyed it. So it is that type of person all through history. It's interesting. Can they be created, or is that mostly just a specific type of genetic or IQ or something that causes that type of person to emerge out of a society?
I think they're not created, but they can be nurtured. In other words, there's several categories of personality types: passive aggressive, they're the Jungian personality types. I like to think of there are actives. These are the people, you know, the cop on the beat doesn't want to be promoted to be a detective and be stuck behind the desk. They like being outdoors. The ultimate actives are special forces, when they retire, it's rough. They have to become smoke jumpers and jump out of airplanes and fight fires. They have to be active. They don't. Then there are scholars who want to go through piles of books and put together ideas. There are nurturers who want to take care of other people, and there are visionary creatives. So I think it's genetic or it's inherent, but it can be nurtured and supported or squashed. In Cambodia, they were very good at it. They identified everybody that had marks on their nose from eyeglasses and killed them all. So that'll, cut down on the amount of creativity.
Charles, you want to slip in a question real quick?
Sure. Professor Lobell, that was fantastic. A couple of questions. You mentioned the impact of networking on us as we exchange our biome in our creative process. Politicize that if you dare, in the distancing the higher ups have imposed on humanity over the past year. They seem to want to mask us and separate us, yet to get to this new world out of creative vision, wouldn't the networking be critical so we can have that biome exchange to grow this new world? Number one.
I agree. I think that's a great point. And I'm looking for something better than Facebook. I don't know about everybody else, but I made too many Facebook friends thinking I could use it to promote my book. And every time I go on, it's just acres of junk that somebody should make a new social network where you're limited to 100 friends at the most, and there's no advertising, and you just see what they're up to and can exchange with them. So I think when we get that, we'll have some much better networking.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting phenomenon that we're in the midst of, that's for sure. I was going to look to some of the audience here, and I was going to tap Jim, since you guys were chatting a little before this event. Jim, did you have a little commentary to throw in here based on what we've been discussing so far?
Do I have a commentary?
Sure. Yeah, no. Right. There's a load.
No,
What? No, this guy, no comment.
No, but I have a question, actually. Let me look back. So I'm wondering if Joseph Campbell's, all the notes he took from those books for 5 years are available somewhere.
Yeah, his library went to Pacific Graduate University in Santa Barbara, and they eventually couldn't maintain it. So it's at one of the California universities, I'm not sure which one. But when we set up his library at Pacifica, we set it up just like he had it in his study. And what he did was, he imagined he was inside the globe of the earth. And here is North America, and then here would be Japan, here would be China, and he had all of his books arranged as
geographically.
Yeah, so his stuff was very well taken care of, and it's at one of the California universities.
I filmed a gentleman, Robert David Steele. I don't know if you've heard of him. A little while back, doing an excellent talk. He was. I'm not sure if he's still doing that, but he had read and reviewed the most books on Amazon, nonfiction of pretty much anybody, over 2,000 books. And they were all about culture, education, environment, and everything related to our lives around us, creativity. And he did the same thing. He made, notes on them, book notes, reviews, and they're all available now on his website, that sort of thing. I really recommend it. If anyone's interested in that video, I have a copy of it.
So I have a couple of comments about that. One is, I think all of us, like me, should be doing more Amazon reviews. It's a way to generate cultural exchange. You know, I have 250,000 views of my lectures on YouTube and 30,000 for some of them. And so that there's people all over the world can interact with these ideas. When I was in high school, I had an LP record, one by Edward Teller. One side was the size and nature of the universe. The other side was relativity theory. I listened to it over and over. It's the only thing I had. But today, everybody I just named in this lecture, you can see 50 lectures by them on YouTube. Now, the thing I'm worried about is when this guy Steele dies, that's going to disappear. You know, his widow might maintain the website for 5 years and then poof. So the Library of Congress ought to be doing more to preserve everything.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, and great talk. Yes, quantum connectivity is really, I think, where we're going and what we need to change the, what's going to be changing our future.
Now, with this networking, we have to think, what do we mean by an individual? What do we give up and what do we gain?
Yeah.
So that was Marshall McLuhan's big thing, that the discrete individual was a function of literate society that read books. And with the electronic emerging world, we were becoming a global village. There are no individuals in a village. You do what the village decides we're going to do. You don't say, oh, you guys stay at the campfire. I'm going to go back in the hut and read a book. That's not part of a village. So we have to think hard about how we navigate these new cultures.
When you're talking in that vein, what's the situation with education? I mean, you're in the educational world. It seems like it's moving more into regimented, everyone in a box, everyone conformity. No, we're teaching you what to know, not how to think, so to speak.
That's true. And it's a problem in my school. I don't get into arguments about it, but I like to think that the students take it all with a grain of salt.
Well, that's good to see if that's the case, because it's a concern. So one thing just about one of your earlier comments, you were talking about Spengler as opposed to Marx and stuff. What kind of gave you the rationale to go from one side to the other in that regard?
As I teach architectural history. And
What's that now? I'm sorry.
I teach architectural history.
Yes.
And various courses, a big survey beginning to today and all that kind of stuff. And Spengler shows how a culture begins by laying down its epic poem and its temple form. So in the epic poem is the moral structure of a person in that culture. So the Iliad opens with rage. Achilles is enraged at being disrespected. Achilles is invited to the Trojan War. He goes to his mother, who's a goddess, and says, should I go? She says, you have two choices. You can stay home, have a family, live a long life, and be happy. You can go to the war and you will die, but you will be remembered forever. And that's what the Greeks valued. It's embedded in the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Greek temple, the temple establishes the space, metaphorically, in which you can move. You look at an Egyptian temple and it's linear. You don't go around back, you go in a straight line. You progress through your life in a series of set stages. That's shown by the temple. You look at a Gothic cathedral. You stand in the nave of a Gothic cathedral and look up. And right there, it's obvious. It will be the descendants of the people who built this cathedral who will circle the earth and go into space. It's all laid out in 1200, what they're going to do. So to understand architecture, I don't think you can understand it without Spengler.
Very good. Very interesting for sure. Any other questions that we have here today for Professor Lobell?
Yeah, this is Joel Hodroff, Professor. Nice to come face to face with you. Maybe I'll put on my video for a minute. So I'd like to hear a little bit about your economics. I haven't had a chance to read into it yet, but I'll tell you just a couple outside the box bits of thinking of mine. Everything today we know about money economics and commerce was inherited from scarcity, and that drove win-lose competition over money and a grow or die business imperative. Today, you know, there isn't scarcity. Food's an abundant, renewable resource, but we won't feed everybody, right? So everything's still money-centered, scarcity-centered, etc. And I'll just throw on one more little thing, but there's a lot of distinctions in my work. Money innovation's part and parcel of all economic history and all economic paradigm shifts, and it's always technology driven. So barter to gold coins, based on smelting to paper currency, based on printing to credit cards and e-commerce, based on computers and the internet. So obviously we need a next generation of money to make any progress. And I challenge that it's cryptocurrency because that's just one more scarce token, you know, a speculative game, even though a lot of radicals love it. We can do much better. Walden 2 demonstrated a ledger currency. You know, B.F. Skinner created a utopian eco-village that didn't pass around tokens at all. It was just all entries in a ledger. So share a little bit about your economics.
Well, there's certain things that I don't. I would say my focus is on the creative individual. Now, yes, we're in a culture of abundance. I do a course on technology, and I'm a big fan of Peter Diamandis, and I do a whole contrast between scarcity and abundance. In scarcity, the more you use, the less there is. In abundance, the more you use, the more there is. The more people that use Wikipedia, the better it gets. So there is something there, but I'm more interested in freeing the individual that's going to create these new worlds than saying what they should be. But you're obviously giving it a lot of thought, so thank you, and we're looking forward to hearing more.
Yeah, thank you.
No, it is an interesting construct that we keep inheriting these past infrastructures, like you said. And for me, I used to be, because when I talked about music, I used to be involved in the record industry. And I said, since the invention of YouTube, suddenly you didn't need permission to be famous. Because all those people, they had to have a patron saint or whatever, or you had to get signed by a record label or somebody, and they'd pick through thousands of people, just like when you watch those shows where somebody sings and they're a waiter and they're like, what an amazing singer. Had this show not existed, they'd have never broken out of their little shell. So it's interesting to see how we're going to be able to break things open. I mean, that's kind of our objective with what we're doing here, but
Cool.
Man, it is tough. Everything is so locked down.
Well, but even when there's freedom, there's all this scramble for attention. So a colleague of mine who's written 30 books, and he's the most brilliant person I know. He's read everything, literally. But he reviewed on Amazon one of my books, and I'm supposed to review one of his. And he says, Lobell, where's my review? I said, I'm still reading it. And I think some of us write more books than we read. So it's, there was I was listening to an interview on public radio with the editor of a poetry magazine. He said, we get more people sending us poems that they want to publish than we have subscribers. In other words, more people write poetry than read poetry. So it's not that, people break through. you get the Joe Rogans who out of nowhere explode to being bigger than any TV channel. But there's 1,000 others that don't explode. So it's very difficult.
As a consequence, I'm sure a lot of important people are lost, but it's still really marveling that somebody like a Da Vinci breaks through, or in every age, if you're that talented, somehow, in spite of everything here, they still seem to make it to the top.
Well, that's another thing that I think we can have what we want. In other words, my school, if it said, we want to be this, hire the people who are doing this, give them support. And, if they're famous artists, they'll come out for nothing one afternoon a week for one semester. It's only 15 trips. They can afford the taxi. They're rich and famous. But somebody has to say, this is what we stand for. And we're now committed to getting the best people to cooperate to make that happen. That's what the Medicis did. They had scouts. They found Leonardo. They found Michelangelo. They found Raphael. They grabbed them, paid off their parents to adopt them, put them in a context where they would get the best education in the arts, and bred these artists and scholars that made Florence be the Renaissance. It was done deliberately by people who were doing it deliberately.
Excellent. Good perspective by putting it in that position. James, I see your hand is up.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Professor. Wonderful lecture. I would just like to make a comparison between your story, your metaphors of living networks and digital networks, and to say that many of the living networks have the intelligence built into the nodes or the cells. The rules for recreating that oak tree exist in every cell of the oak tree. One of the deficiencies in the modern digital network, reflecting on your comment about Facebook, is that Zuckerberg holds on to that control at the center of the network in violation of what's called the end-to-end principle in internet design. And that's why a lot of our digital networks are failing, is because they don't adhere to that design principle, meaning the users should be all completely empowered to have complete control over what content they see, what ads they see, what information they share, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's the next evolution in network design, is that users at the nodes of these networks will be further empowered, and those networks that do it will be the ones that are successful. The question I have for you is, how would you redesign, or what changes would you make in a traditional bricks and mortar university setting to identify and nurture the creatives?
Let's do the first one first. And if you look up my lectures on YouTube, there's one called, I think it's John Lobell, Technological Optimism. And I look at the work of Neil Gershenfeld, who's at MIT. And I just touched on that architect, Harish Lavani, where I said the information, the computing is in the material. You're right. The acorn knows how to make, an oak tree knows how to make an oak tree, whereas my laptop doesn't know how to make a laptop. So that's the next generation of computers that Gershenfeld's working on. It's a whole new computer architecture going beyond Turing machines and von Neumann machines. As far as bricks and mortar universities, I think they should differentiate, not all be the same, and be about something. Say, we're about, I admire St. John's. They say, we're going to read the classics in Greek. We're going to make our way through Plato and Aristotle, through Euclid. So rather than studying plane geometry, they read Euclid's book, preferably in Greek. And it's not my kind of thing. I don't read, I have enough problems with French, but somebody's doing that. And they shouldn't all try to be the same. They should have visions and then focus on them, and then find people who are into that. So that would be mine. Okay, it's something I'm talking to my school about all the time. And I think that we are in a new world where we can think genomically. And I think that we could be a leading school of design if we did it. So, but I'm not getting anywhere. So, but I think individual foci is what should be happening.
Yeah, that's a sad thing, like you're describing. It seems like all these schools that had vision at their onset have all tried to become the same, where we're just a department store and everybody sells Levi's. I mean, what's the
Right.
difference? They start bragging about who's got a better cafeteria or a better gym. So it
I
is,
used to say my school was a real dump until 15 years ago. And it's been fixed up, but it was an incredible school. And I refer to our students as sewer rats. If they can survive Pratt, they can handle anything. And they were really tough and went out in the world and could handle anything. I had a great story from years ago. I had a big studio and 2 students disappeared. And a month later, they showed up. I said, where the hell have you guys been? He says, well, I'm a Jordanian, he's an Israeli. We had to go home and drive tanks and shoot at each other. And now we have to finish the model. So I thought those were cool students.
that's a great one. What a perfect way to end our little chat today. I definitely want to thank you so much for being here. This was fabulous.
Thanks for having me.